What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast. This is your host, Brandon DeCruz, and on today's episode, we're going to cover the topic of advanced dieting strategies. We're going to be covering protein sparing modified fast and rapid fat loss days, undulating calorie cycles, and then also my push pull advanced fat loss method. So, fat loss is one of the most common goals that clients come to me with and that I help them achieve. And over the last 11 years, or 11 plus years at this point that I've been coaching, I've worked with clients of all different backgrounds. So the first few years of my coaching career were very focused on working with physique competitors, athletes, and fitness models. However, I've literally worked with everyone from competitors at the highest level of the sport, including some individuals that have competed at the Mr. Olympia contest, especially in men's physique. And then I've also had, so many, hundreds of lifestyle clients like your lifestyle Lisa and your Gen Pop Gym. And nowadays, the vast majority of the clients that I work with are high achievers and high performers of some sort. So in some capacity, they are excelling in one area of their life or maybe in multiple areas at that. And many of the clients I work with are either high level executives in their corporate careers or they own their own businesses. And the one commonality between all my clients, regardless of their backgrounds and what their body composition looks like, externally, is that when they contact me, they want to become a better version of themselves. And they're seeking my help because they want someone with a lot of experience and expertise in the fields of nutrition, training, health, physiology, and exercise science. And so over the last 11 years of coaching, I've trialed and tested literally hundreds of strategies, methods, and approaches on myself and with my clients. And seeing as I'm very data driven and quite analytical, I've always taken a strategic and calculated approach where I'll make large scale changes in isolation. And then what I do is I track and gauge my own and also my client's response to those specific adjustments or that intervention. And the advanced fat loss strategies I'm going to cover this week are methods I've developed after a decade plus doing this with clients, where I've taken a Bruce Lee mentality of sorts. So essentially, what I mean by that is I've tried an approach on myself and on others, and then I've tracked the changes and assessed their responses. And then I've taken the strategies that were the most useful and continued to apply them. But when strategies I tested weren't useful, I discarded them, as I do not believe in becoming attached to a method that is inferior. So if we look at the Bruce Lee mentality, it is take on what's useful and then discard what's useless. So essentially, that's what I've come to in terms of my ability to decipher what are good or what are optimal versus suboptimal methods. And the genesis of many of my coaching methods really comes down to my own self-experimentation and then digging into the science to a greater degree than many would or even could. And so I personally competed 15 times on stage and have done well over 100 photo shoots since the early 2010s. So even prior to starting to coach others, which I started doing in 2013, I had spent several years working in a gym as a personal trainer, and then I was already, training myself. I was already very deeply involved and obsessed with this, to be honest with you guys. And so, even prior to 2013, when I officially went online in terms of online coaching, I was already trialing different methods, working with other coaches, and trying to learn literally as much as I possibly could about the human body, about physiology, about fat loss, about muscle building, about body recomposition, about all these topics to be able to apply them to myself and then eventually to apply them to others. And this is important to note because the best coaches are often those who have done it ourselves and then helped others do it, which is why one of the ideologies that governs my coaching is that I will never ask one of my clients to do something that I haven't done or I wouldn't be willing to do. And I've also learned a lot of what to do and then also what not to do over the past 14 years. And now I'm able to help others avoid the mistakes of my past and their past so they can make better progress moving forward. I personally, realized early on that I didn't have the genetics to be naturally lean. So I had to dive into all the details to be able to optimize my approach. And all three of the advanced fat loss strategies that I'm going to cover today are methods I've used with myself, and then also I've used with hundreds of clients. So I have a ton of data on these methods. I've seen them work very well for myself and then hundreds of other clients. So I'm going to dive into those on today's podcast. And I've also spent an immense amount of time, energy, effort, and financial investment, money into investing into my education and then learning the science behind fat loss physiology and all things nutrition and training, which have allowed me to create an effective and evidence-based approach to coaching where I'm able to bridge the gap between what's been shown in the research and then I practically apply it within the constraints of my clients' lifestyles to be able to strike a balance between what's optimal for their goals and what's practical for their lifestyle, while also helping them to level up their physiques, improve their health, and better how they look, they feel, and they function. So, on today's podcast, we're really going to center around these advanced fat loss strategies. And it doesn't mean that you have to be an advanced trainee to utilize these. It just means we're going beyond the calorie deficit model, essentially. We're still going to be inducing a deficit, but it isn't just going to be talking about, like, hey, reduce your calories by 500, like the stock standard fitness industry approach, which, yes, it's truthful, but it isn't always useful and it isn't always applicable. And also, it's not always an approach that works for many people. Oftentimes, it's not just a lack of knowledge that limits people from getting results, it's a lack of applicability. So, knowledge, I always say this, and I especially say this to the clients that I work with as well as my mentees, it's knowledge without mileage or knowledge without experience essentially is useless because you can have all the knowledge within your head, but if you're unable to practically apply it to yourself, or if you're a coach and you're working with others, if you don't know how to integrate it into their lifestyle, it's not doing anything for them or for yourself. And so on today's podcast, I'm going to cover three of my favorite advanced dieting strategies, which are going to be rapid fat loss days, aka protein sparing modified fast days, undulating calorie cycles, and then also my push pull advanced fat loss method. The first advanced dieting strategy I'm going to cover today is what I refer to as rapid fat loss days, which I modeled after PSMF days. So most people want faster fat loss. So when I know a client well and I know their body well, I can accelerate the fat loss process if we go about it correctly and if they follow my lead. So I need someone bought into the process. I need to have a good relationship with them. But the reason I started using rapid fat loss day strategy was to be able to help clients achieve more efficient and more effective fat loss without incurring all the negatives that come along with extended low calorie diet, which is why I will use a PSMF in the form of rapid fat loss days that I'll strategically include in a program rather than using a PSMF diet in and of itself, which, if followed every single day, can be fairly brutal. To be honest with you, it is something I've tried myself, but also it can really accelerate the metabolic adaptations and the diet fatigue a dieter accumulates throughout the process of utilizing it too frequently, essentially. And so my rapid fat loss days are a derivation of a method referred to as a protein sparing modified fast, aka a PSMF. A PSMF is a dietary strategy used to induce a large deficit while also sparing muscle protein so that we can maximize fat loss yet retain muscle mass. It's a modified fast in the sense that it isn't a complete fast as you still ingest nutrients throughout the course of the day, but you are making large reductions from your direct carb and fat sources. So you are reducing or completely eliminating starchy carbs, grains, nuts, oils, etc. So you're basically fasting from high calorie containing foods and especially processed foods. A PSMF is a dietary approach which is focused on the goal of creating a large energy deficit to maximize fat loss while also using a protein anchored approach to retain muscle mass. So, this type of approach centers around getting in enough protein to maintain muscle mass and to help with satiety, and then including veggies to get sufficient vitamins, minerals, and fiber. The other features of this type of dietary approach is that it minimizes carbs to decrease insulin levels and increase lipolysis, which is the breakdown of fat, which we did a full fat loss physiology podcast, especially in the context of stubborn body fat. So if you guys want to go through the three-step process and learn more about lipolysis, I recommend that you go back to that podcast. But we see that within this dietary approach, we're minimizing dietary carbohydrates, and then we're also minimizing dietary fat so that our body must tap into our endogenous fat, aka our body fat stores, our body fat, for fuel. So the biggest difference between the traditional PSMF approach that is used in the medical literature and by other practitioners and weight loss clinics and things of that sort, and my approach is the duration and layout of how I set up my rapid fat loss days as compared to a traditional PSMF diet. When it comes to the duration, the difference between a true PSMF diet and my rapid fat loss day approach are the following. A true PSMF is a diet that those living with obesity follow for months at a time. And even those who are in the, say, overweight category, they'll even follow it for 4 to 8 weeks at a time. So this is a continuous dieting approach where you utilize this very low calorie diet with minimal carbs and fats every single day. Whereas my rapid fat loss days are single days of a large deficit that I only use on off training days so that I can help a client create a larger net deficit across the week, but I can ensure my clients are more appropriately fueled on their training days, which is why I don't run rapid fat loss days on training days in most cases. I've also seen research using PSMF diets where individuals are put on these very low calorie diets every day for up to 3 to 6 months at a time. Whereas I only include my rapid fat loss days into a client's program 1 to 3 days per week on average. And that's generally only to be used in the context of a fat loss phase. So say they're dieting for 12 to 16 weeks, I might utilize this approach for 8 weeks out of it. And within the context of that, it may only be 1 to 3 days per week. Whereas you're seeing within the PSMF diet approach, this is months at a time where it's 7 days per week that they're utilizing this approach. Now, when it comes to the actual dietary layout of a PSMF diet versus a rapid fat loss phase, I've also adjusted how this is done because I'm working with clients in the real world. And I'm not working with research subjects that are locked in a metabolic ward where they're being tightly monitored 24/7. So the macro splits and the calorie totals that I use with my clients are far easier to adhere to than would be a regular PSMF. And so a true PSMF is where you basically only consume just lean protein and you minimize carbs to 20 to 30 grams per day and fat to 30 grams or under per day. So it's a very low calorie diet. And many times these are liquid diets, which don't actually help these individuals develop good habits and behaviors around food, nor is it a dietary approach that they can use once the study is over, because this is generally done in a research setting where they're providing them with liquid nutrition, which is titrated towards essentially their weight loss goals. And so oftentimes when these subjects or their participants or the individuals that are within this study design leave, they don't have access to these same meals. And also you have to think long term that most people, I mean, I'm going to say 99% of individuals would not be able to exist on a liquid diet long term, especially from a satiety perspective, as well as hunger management and just health in general. So on the other hand, my rapid fat loss days are built around whole foods. So I construct these days and the diets that I have my clients using on these days using whole food protein to keep clients satiated and to ensure they're getting nutrient dense protein sources. I add in essential fats from fish oil or omega-3 supplementation, that which could come in the form, say, algae oil, to ensure that they hit their essential fatty acid requirements. I also use a much higher amount of non-starchy vegetables than would be used in a PSMF diet to ensure they get a diverse amount of micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and fibers so that they can have sufficient nutrients and they're also able to feel full and satiated on these days. And then I also make sure that they're getting in sufficient electrolytes so that they feel better during these days. Because one commonality that I've seen in much of the literature, but also in individuals that have come to me from weight loss clinics that have used some type of PSMF approach, is that they feel very fatigued and lethargic. And that's often due to having low electrolyte levels. And also they kind of go through almost like the keto flu that you would hear about. And that's also due to a lack of electrolytes and also insulin levels dropping down, where now they're not storing as much sodium. They have low magnesium levels. There's a bunch of micronutrients and electrolytes, especially, that have been decreased, especially within the tissues themselves. So they're feeling lethargic, they're feeling low energy, they're getting headaches, things of that sort, which are unfavorable effects at that. So my goal with how I set up these rapid fat loss days up is to get the few essential nutrients we need to get from our diet, which are essential amino acids, which we get from whole food protein, essential fatty acids, which we can get from fish oil or omega-3 supplementation. And I want to get the micronutrients. So that's going to be vitamins and minerals coming from micronutrient dense vegetable sources. And this allows me to ensure that we have checked off all the boxes in terms of our nutritional needs, but we're also able to create a large deficit, which can help with increasing the amount of fat we burn on these rapid fat loss days and during the weeks that I implement these strategies in with my clients. These rapid fat loss days are not appropriate for everyone. So I do want to make that very, very upfront and known right from the start. And so this is a strategy I'll only use with clients who I believe are ready for this strategy and for whom I've worked with for a decent amount of time. So I know their body well, and I know them as individuals, and I also know how well or how exactly they respond to dieting. So this isn't a method I throw right into the first fat loss phase that I take a client through, especially not at the start of a dieting phase, because if I don't have data on this individual and how they've responded to dieting so far, or just being in a deficit, I'm not going to just throw caution to the wind and throw an advanced strategy their way. I usually reserve this advanced fat loss strategy for specific types of clients, including clients who I have a good rapport with and who I know well. So those that I have worked with for a continued period of time, I know that I have good communication with them. They're very honest, they're open, they're transparent with me, and we're able to be that for both of us. So I'm an objective person in their corner that's guiding them in the direction that they want to go to get to their goals, but also they are open, honest, objective with me in terms of their biofeedback, in terms of, hey, I slipped up this week, coach. This is what happened. This, and that. Just having that open line of communication is so essential and so important for coaching. Other individuals that I find to be clients that are in a better position to utilize this approach with are clients who are experienced and skilled dieters, a client who has the goal of eventually doing a photo shoot or a contest prep and who's trying to push for extreme levels of leanness, clients who have a solid foundation of nutritional habits and behaviors that they can lean on and fall back upon. So this is really important because I will not utilize this type of strategy if someone doesn't have the basics nailed down. And then also individuals who have a good relationship with food. I've also used this advanced strategy with clients who have important events coming up where we need to quickly improve their body composition and the way they look for a limited period of time. And we're kind of limited on the amount of time that we have till we get there. So this is usually something I've done with fitness models and influencers I've coached who have had gigs or photo shoots, movie roles, or even like sponsorship appearances where they're required to show up at their best and they have a certain look that their sponsor or their company or their employer is looking for them to attain. And this is almost like part of their job responsibility, but we have a limited amount of time to get them ready for it. So I need to speed up the process. And this is one of the many methods that I use to be able to achieve that goal. I've also used this for clients that aren't in that category. So they're not making a living off of the way that they look. However, they have very important events in their life. So this could be weddings, important family events, or vacations coming up. And I've only employed this strategy when it's been a very important event to that individual client themselves, as it's important to realize that it isn't realistic, nor is it healthy to jump into a fat loss phase and especially into utilizing an advanced, an aggressive approach when just for every a single event that you have. So you can look at every single event that you have coming up in your life as something you need to get lean for. Because if that was the case, you'd be dieting all year round, and that isn't healthy. And so if someone has a very important event, and this is something that we're going to have a discussion about, I'm going to make sure that they look their best. And so, in the case of a wedding, honeymoon, or say, like I just had a client that I prepped for a 10-year wedding anniversary trip, these are events that are once in a lifetime. And they're milestones within that client's life. So I do believe in helping a client be their best for them. Now, I also think it's important to cover who should not try a rapid fat loss approach or utilize these rapid fat loss days. Advanced fat loss strategies like rapid fat loss days and protein sparing modified fast days are not for those who aren't experienced and skilled dieters, individuals who struggle with adhering to a smaller deficit, which will cause them to be unable to maintain a larger deficit. So this wouldn't even be practically applicable for those that, even with a very small and moderate deficit, they can't even stick to the plan. This isn't applicable for those who have a poor relationship with food and someone who has an eating disorder in the past or has a history of binge restrict cycles, because that is not something that we want to mess with in terms of getting aggressive on the front end with dieting. Now, before I go into the next advanced fat loss strategy, I want to put it out there that I am thinking about recording a full podcast on protein sparing modified fasts, as there's so much to go over with this approach that it would take up the entirety of a podcast to truly do it justice. So if my rapid fat loss days and the protein sparing modified fasts are something that have piqued your interest, be sure to drop me a DM on my Instagram, which is at @BrandonDeCruz_ on IG, and let me know if you'd like a full length podcast on the topic, and I'll make it happen. Now, the second advanced dieting strategy I'm going to cover in today's podcast is what I refer to as an undulating calorie cycle. When I first got into coaching, carb cycling was very popular, and many were using a model of low, medium, and high days, which they would rotate throughout the course of the week. So I tried this myself, and I also used it with plenty of clients, but I found a few drawbacks to it, which had made me shift away from this approach of the low, medium, and high days. One of the drawbacks is that there are 3 diet days that you would need to adjust your food amounts on, which some clients felt was confusing and hard to keep up with. So I really found that unless someone was very dialed in or was a competitor or worked from home and liked to make their food fresh daily, it was very hard for them to keep up with the constant rotation and titration of food amounts. But the main drawback I found in the traditional carb cycle approach was that going through the standard rotation of a low day, followed by a medium day, followed by a high day, didn't consider the energetic demands of that specific day. And many times a low day would fall on a training day, and a high day would fall on an off day. And so I started using an undulating calorie cycle, which is this is what I refer to it as, where I'd adjust the carb and fat content of the diet to better suit the energetic demands of that day. So how I often will set up a client's diet up now is to have higher calorie training days and lower calorie non-training days. So I'm cycling their calorie intake to bias more calories where they can benefit from them most, which is on their training days. And one of the reasons I design many of my diets like this is because I want clients going into training sessions well fueled so they can push their training performances. And I also want them to have sufficient nutrients to recover after their workout. So I'm trying to optimize performance and then also facilitate better recovery. However, if a client's goal is losing a substantial and a significant amount of body fat, we still need to create a net deficit across the week, which is why I'll use lower calorie days on non-training days. This approach also allows me to align with exercise physiology and what we know about exercise physiology, because when we train, we see an increase in anabolism and muscle protein synthesis levels, which are highest after training and generally peak within 24 hours or less for most well-trained individuals. So I like to program more calories in and around that period, especially in the peri-workout window, meaning pre and post-workout, as that's a time period where these nutrients are going to be better utilized and partitioned towards building muscle rather than going towards being stored in fat. So going towards muscle growth rather than fat storage. There's also research that suggests that when you use a nutrient timing approach and distribute more of your calories between your workout and your post-workout period, you get better training performances, nutrient partitioning, muscle growth, and strength outcomes, and a better P ratio, which is the ratio of lean mass to fat mass. So essentially what we're seeing is better lean mass gain, less fat mass gain, or in the case of dieting, when you're actually in a deficit, we're going to see a better ratio of muscle growth or muscle retention and better fat loss, more fat loss essentially. These are some of the reasons why I cycle calories and place most of my clients' nutrients and calories within this period of increased anabolism and better nutrient partitioning on training days. And this is also why I wouldn't place as many calories on off days, because we'd be able to make better use of those calories eating them on training days and around that peri-workout window. So what I do with the undulating calorie cycle is I have a greater calorie intake and especially a greater carbohydrate intake on training days as compared to non-training days. And this is an approach I use both during fat loss and lean building phases, as I've used it with hundreds and hundreds of clients and have found it to provide several benefits, including the fact that it allows me to more accurately suit a client's calorie intake to their calorie needs and energetic demands of that day. So on a training day, when I have a client doing say a hard progressive resistance training session, which is going to rely on glucose because this is a glycolytic activity, I'm able to ensure that their carb intake is higher that day. So it's able to facilitate the process of fueling that workout, but also replenishing muscle glycogen. It also helps to improve fueling prior to training, which improves training performance. It allows for quicker glycogen replenishment and better muscle recovery, and then also allows for better muscle growth and or muscle retention. And I've also found this approach to work well in lean building phases, where I've seen it help clients stay leaner by having some days at a surplus and other days at maintenance or in a slight deficit. It allows for longer, more productive lean gaining phases because we're mitigating some of the drawbacks or some of the downsides of being constantly in a surplus, especially from like an appetite and digestion perspective. So by utilizing this calorie cycle, we're able to help that client with their appetite and their digestion, as you're not having to constantly stuff down food on a daily basis. So it's not like you're constantly in a surplus. And then also it lets you be more productive on off days as you have lighter meals and smaller meals that don't bog you down as much. So I really utilize this a lot with a lot of the entrepreneurs I work with, or a lot of the busy working professionals, where they're like, listen, I know I need to get enough calories to train. And on those days I'll be locked in, but on my off days, I kind of just want to be able to fly through the day, have small meals, not have to spend so much time meal prepping or sitting down to eat meals. Like I want to be able to have lighter meals that are allowing me to spend more time being productive on the things that are going to drive my career forward rather than just my body composition progress. So these are all considerations. It can't just be physiology. It has to be, considering psychology and also that person's lifestyle and what practically fits in within their lifestyle. The third and final advanced strategy I'm going to cover today is my push-pull advanced fat loss method. As a coach, one of my main roles and responsibilities is to know when and how to push a client to get them to make more progress, but also to know when to pull them back, as many clients can be their own worst enemy. And I work with many type A driven individuals who would honestly overdo the diet, overdo the training if I left them to their own devices. And oftentimes they come to me in a place of stagnation. So they have been plateaued or they've been stalled or they haven't made progress. And sometimes it isn't that they haven't pushed themselves hard enough. Sometimes it's that they've overdone things, whether that be training too much or training with far too much intensity for their level of stress or their lifestyle demands or their lack of sleep or things of that sort. So this is where I've developed a push-pull method that I especially find applicable and beneficial to fat loss phases. So my push-pull method is an intermittent dieting strategy. And it isn't something that I use with all clients, as I do have some clients that I find respond better to just a continuous dieting approach. But before we get into my push-pull method, I'll compare and contrast intermittent dieting and then also continuous energy restriction or continuous dieting. So intermittent dieting is when you alternate between periods of energy restriction, where you're in a calorie surplus, you're in an effective surplus, or a deficit rather. So you're in a deficit and you're in a state of negative energy balance. And then also you rotate between periods at energy balance, where you go back to your maintenance calories. Whereas continuous energy restriction is when you start a diet and you consistently stay in a calorie deficit for the entire phase without any periods or breaks at maintenance. And like I said, these are both methods that can get you to the same goal. However, for some people, the intermittent dieting strategies work better, where they're in a deficit certain periods or certain portions of that phase, and they're outside of a deficit and at maintenance for certain portions of that phase. And then I have other clients that are like, listen, I want to get in, I want to get out, let's just rock. And they just want to utilize a consistent deficit day in and day out for the course of the phase, whether that be 8, 12, 16 weeks. They want to get in, they want to get the fat off, and then they want to get back to maintenance in terms of getting into a metabolic restoration phase or a maintenance phase or a reverse diet phase. And that is the next phase that I will transition them out of. And what I like to do is to employ my push-pull method during fat loss phases, as I'm a big believer in the principle of periodizing our approach to nutrition, both within and then between phases. If you aren't familiar with the concept of periodizing your nutrition, aka nutritional periodization, I encourage you to go back to episode 92 of this podcast. So, about 30 episodes ago. And that one was entitled, let me pull it up, Nutritional Periodization: How to Use a Periodized Approach to Nutrition to Potentiate Progress and Physique Development. As I cover this topic in detail and then also my approach to it. So if you guys are wondering, hey, what does he mean by nutritional periodization? Please go back and listen to that. I took a deep dive into that topic, and it'll really explain it in better detail. And so the reason that I mentioned that is I really like to use nutritional periodization during a fat loss phase, as I found it to benefit. I found a massive benefit to utilizing intermittent dieting strategies like refeeds, or another strategy, which I refer to as deficit deloads, which I'm going to go through. I'm going to do a full podcast on that one, honestly, because that is one of the most effective interventions that I've been utilizing the last few years with clients. And this deficit deload isn't something that I've seen other people speak about. So I do want to go through that. But essentially, why I'm utilizing these intermittent dieting strategies is to help mitigate and manage some of the negative feedback, and especially the negative biofeedback that I see many clients experience, such as dietary or psychological fatigue during a diet. And I find this to be an effective strategy for managing, psychological stress, physiological stress as well. So stress on the body, psychological and mental stress, diet fatigue, heightened hunger, and problems with regulating, one's appetite, decreases in energy that often result in down regulations in a client's NEAT. So I'm seeing essentially their step count drop, or them having a issue, or even just finding it more difficult to keep their activity levels up, more slouching, more sedentary activity, low energy expenditure levels, reductions in training performance, decreases in glycogen stores, and being flat. So we had this flat appearance to them. So I found that utilizing these intermittent dieting strategies can kind of like put a reset into the system, essentially, and really help with rectifying some of the issues that a client may be dealing with. So with my push-pull method, I like to push hard for fat loss progress by using an assertive calorie deficit for at least 2 to 4 weeks at a time before pulling back and dissipating diet fatigue with a fatigue management strategy like a deficit deload, which is an approach that I've been using with clients for several years, which I'm eventually, like I mentioned before, going to do a full-length podcast on. So for instance, I just got photos this morning from one of my clients, Patty, who I just utilized this push-pull method with. So I started Patty off with a primer phase when we first started working together. And really my goals in doing so were to improve her health markers, her insulin sensitivity, especially because they had really, her insulin sensitivity had really faded with her previous coach and the approach that they had taken to nutrition and training. And then also I wanted to dial in her training. So there was a lot of things that I was working on the back end on. So just even, range of motion, things that really getting into a lengthened position, especially for her lower body that had experienced an injury and she had a surgery on one of her knees. And having, I've had reconstructive surgery on my knee. We had a conversation right off the bat, and I could tell she had some self-limiting beliefs about her abilities, not only to grow muscle, but also her training capacity abilities. And I've just seen this woman come so far within the last few months. But I initially put her in a primer phase. And during that primer phase, she achieved some impressive body recomposition where she essentially gained muscle and she lost fat and was crushing her training sessions. So after we wrapped up the primer phase, and I knew her goals had been to lose more body fat, what I wanted to do, or what I did do, was I transitioned her into a fat loss phase, which was last month. That's when I made that transition. And what I did was I had her push hard for 4 weeks of fat loss. And then throughout that time, she was losing fat at a steady rate. So I saw her make substantial body composition progress, but I did push her hard. She is an experienced trainee. She's a woman in her 50s. So even just from an age perspective, it's a little bit harder to get the body moving in terms of fat loss progress. And so I pushed her. But what I did after that was I pulled her back this past week and had her go into a 4-day deficit deload to dissipate fatigue and to refresh and to reset her from the diet itself. This is also an approach that I found to be really beneficial for clients with busy schedules and lives, and especially those who travel for work. So with some, I will push them harder for progress when they're home and they're not on the road. And then I'll pull them back when they have another business trip where they got to get on the road and they're going to be kind of out of their routine and out of their comfortable environment. And I've also found many benefits to this push-pull method, as it allows us to break a longer fat loss phase or a bigger fat loss goal into smaller blocks. So when I have a client who has, say, 30 to 50 pounds to lose, it can often seem overwhelming from the start. So by breaking the push phases into smaller blocks, like pushing for fat loss phases into smaller blocks, it makes it easier for them to wrap their heads around, because it's not like I'm saying to them, hey, listen, you have 30 pounds to lose and you're going to lose at a hypothetical 1 pound per week. It's going to take you 30 weeks. It's like, listen, we're going to diet for 6 to 8 weeks and then we're going to take a break, and so on and so forth. And we break this up into more manageable chunks so they don't get ahead of themselves. I really have the ideology that we should be where our feet are. You should focus on each day one at a time and just trying to do your best within that day. So take it, especially in a dieting phase, take it one walk, one meal, one workout, one task at a time, essentially, so that you don't overwhelm yourself and get too caught up with what may happen in the future where you don't even know where you're going to be if you don't execute in the moment. I also find this push-pull method to bolster adherence by having periods of a break after focused periods of pushing. Also allows us to accommodate life events. And I just did this with 2 of my clients this past week who had family vacations that were aligned with the July 4th holiday. So I had a long-term client, Angie, who went to Cape Cod with her son. And so I put her right into a deficit deload. And then also I had a client, Marty, who went with his family to Lake Tahoe. And this was a trip that he had on the books for a long period of time. So I told him early on in this phase, we were pushing for his 40th birthday to get him photo shoot ready. And I said, listen, we're going to have to push hard for progress until we get to that point. And then for those 7 or 8 days, I'm putting you right into a deficit deload. So this was already on the calendar. I had this marked out and I already knew the transition or the move I was going to make. And all I did was right prior to him leaving, I gave him the exact calorie amounts and the exact structure to how the deficit deload would look. It also allows me to periodize the diet around a client's life, because we have to consider the fact that for a lot of clients, and now keep in mind that I work with a lot of fitness professionals, so diet, training, nutrition, body composition is very important to them. But I also work with a ton. Half my roster are lifestyle clients that are, high achievers, that are business executives, CEOs, VPs of companies. It's like, yes, they want to improve their health and their physique and the way that they look and they function, but it's not their top priority. They have their family, they have their business. And so I always have to take that into consideration. So I try to periodize the diet around a client's life and really accommodate them. And also, it may help, like this strategy may help attenuate metabolic adaptation. So there is a recent, actually a new intermittent dieting systematic review and meta-analysis that looked at intermittent dieting strategies like refeeds and diet breaks and compared them to continuous dieting interventions to see their effects on body composition and the degree of metabolic adaptation utilized within each strategy. So these intermittent dieting strategies could be anywhere from a 1 to 3 day refeed to a 1 to 2 week diet break. That's what was included within the systematic review and meta-analytic breakdown. And when looking at metabolic adaptation, specifically at the level of the resting metabolic rate, they found that continuous calorie restriction led to greater decreases in resting metabolic rate, whereas the intermittent dieting strategies, like the ones that I'm referring to with my push-pull method, my calorie cycle, all these things, it actually led to a better preservation of resting metabolic rate. And so these are just, in totality, we see many benefits, not only from a psychological perspective, but also a potential physiological perspective. And so these are just some advanced strategies that I found to be very effective over the years. And like I said, these are just a few of the many advanced strategies I've developed over the past 11 plus years I've been coaching to help clients look better, feel better, function better, and also be more successful in the process where they're actually able to get their end goal. Whereas a lot of times people come to me and they've been on diet failure after diet failure, whether it be that they try to do it on their own and they didn't have the support they needed, or they had a coach that just gave them a cookie cutter plan that wasn't customized to themselves. If you guys enjoy these types of coaching focused episodes, let me know, as Jeff and I can do more episodes specifically on the most effective methods we have found to work with the many clients that we've coached over the years. As always, guys, thank you for listening to another episode of the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast. Right now is the beginning of July as I'm recording this, because we are well in advance of the podcast being aired. However, I do have my coaching roster open. So if you guys need anything from me, especially if you're interested in one-on-one customized coaching, feel free to reach out to me through my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com, or you can find me for daily content and educational information at @BrandonDeCruz_. Also, please remember to follow the show on Spotify or iTunes, whatever is your preference, and make sure you're subscribed to the show and leave us a review or a 5-star rating, preferably on either platform. And then share this episode on your stories, and be sure to tag me. So at @BrandonDeCruz_, because really the intention of this podcast has always been to bridge the gap between research and information and practical application so that all of you out there can look better, can feel better, can function better. And by sharing this show, you're able to help more people accomplish or attain that same goal. So you're essentially expanding what I call the ripple effect of coaching, or ripple effect of good content and good information dissemination, which means that if I can share something with you that benefits your life or your approach or your health, your physique, and you share it with someone else, we're all helping others. So that is really something that has a lot of intrinsic value to me in terms of one of my life's biggest passions, as well as something that I find to be a purpose of mine, a driving force in why I do what I do. And so, guys, as always, I hope you have a great week. And thank you again for listening to another episode of the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Peace.